Hey there, survivors. Thanks for tuning in to tonight's episode. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. It really helps me keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now let's get started. My name is Eric Thompson. I'm a petty officer first class, stationed with the US Coast Guard at Sector Miami. For nearly 9 years, my duties have ranged from simple maritime patrols to complex rescue operations. I've witnessed capsized boats, hurricanes that tore through coastal towns, and drug runners who would rather sink than surrender. But nothing prepared me for what happened aboard the Aurora Queen. It began early, just after sunrise. The morning of March 11th started with a series of urgent radio transmissions, the kind that immediately set the station buzzing. Cruise ships losing contact isn't entirely unheard of. Storms sometimes knock out equipment, or technical malfunctions silence communication temporarily. But this wasn't just a radio glitch. The Aurora Queen, a luxury liner departing Miami on a round-trip Caribbean route, had suddenly ceased responding to satellite pings, radio calls, and emergency frequencies. For a ship carrying more than 3,500 souls, silence was a grim indicator of trouble. I was part of the crew dispatched aboard our cutter, the USCGC Richard Etheridge, to intercept the liner, establish contact, and assist if necessary. The initial briefing suggested possible engine failure or an electrical outage that disabled their comms array. Nothing catastrophic, but something felt off as soon as we left the dock. It wasn't just the uneasy murmurs among my shipmates, or the anxious way Lieutenant Porter kept checking and rechecking his charts. No, it was subtler than that. It was the sheer emptiness of the ocean itself. Normally, waters near the Florida coast are busy even in the early hours. Yachts, fishing boats, tankers, smaller cruise vessels. But as we moved east, our radar screens remained oddly clear, an empty green sweep, punctuated only by occasional static bursts. Even the marine traffic radio channels were quiet. The air itself seemed heavy, pressing in on us, amplifying every creak and groan from the hull. We located the Aurora Queen roughly 30 nautical miles east of Miami, drifting slowly northward, carried gently by the currents. From a distance, she appeared deceptively peaceful, a massive floating resort, her gleaming white hull pristine, painted trim shining gold and blue under the Caribbean sun. But as we drew closer, the signs of distress became apparent. Lifeboats hung loosely from their davits, partially lowered, swaying with the ship's gentle rocking. The windows along the main promenade deck appeared darkened, reflective like sunglasses, offering no glimpse inside. There were no passengers visible on the decks or balconies. Lieutenant Porter's attempts to hail the vessel continued fruitlessly, his voice increasingly urgent yet professional as he repeated standard procedures over multiple radio bands. Only static replied, a meaningless hiss mocking our efforts. Our cutter pulled alongside the silent behemoth, engines shifting down to hold position. Lieutenant Porter gathered a boarding team. I was selected alongside Petty Officer Carlos Rivera, a rescue swimmer I'd worked with countless times, and Petty Officer Heather Donovan, our communications technician. Two others, Ensign Jake Leonard and Chief Warrant Officer Simon Hargrove, completed our team. A rope ladder was already lowered from the deck, swaying gently in the breeze. Someone had tried to abandon ship, yet something clearly stopped them. Without speaking, we climbed one by one, stepping cautiously onto the deserted promenade deck. At first, it felt more eerie than dangerous. Deck chairs arranged for leisurely afternoons sat abandoned. Plates and cups still rested on tables, food half-eaten, untouched glasses sweating in the tropical heat. The signs of interrupted vacation were everywhere. Discarded sandals, sunglasses, magazines fluttering open in the breeze. We moved cautiously towards the main interior lounge, calling out our presence loudly but hearing no replies. Petty Officer Donovan kept trying the portable radio, cycling through channels, broadcasting continuously. Inside the lounge, chaos reigned. Suitcases and bags were overturned. A buffet table lay half-collapsed, trays scattered across the marble floor. Bottles had shattered, leaving small pools of sticky liquor. There were overturned chairs, broken glass, spilled coffee, all evidence of panic and flight. Yet strangely, no sign of passengers or crew. Donovan glanced around uneasily, keeping close to Rivera. I noticed Leonard gripping his sidearm tightly, fingers visibly white, knuckles stiff. Everyone moved deliberately, shoulders tensed, eyes darting into dark corners and shadowed doorways. Moving toward the central staircase, a distinct smell grew stronger, pungent and sharp, something metallic underneath an overlay of chlorine and disinfectant. On the walls, we saw dark smudges, streaks that, as we drew nearer, revealed themselves as handprints. Dozens of them, frantic and overlapping, stretching down the corridor, trailing toward lower decks. Rivera nodded quietly toward the stairs. Lieutenant Porter motioned for silence, then gestured downwards. We descended slowly, carefully, footsteps muffled by plush carpet, flashlights sweeping cautiously through darkened hallways. The emergency lighting glowed a dim red, bathing the lower decks in a surreal crimson twilight. Deck by deck, the evidence of a frantic evacuation or struggle became clearer. Luggage abandoned mid-step, belongings spilled from open stateroom doors. Occasionally we heard faint noises echoing down distant corridors, a tapping, a rustling, but each investigation yielded nothing. We reached Deck 5, the medical center and lower dining areas. The smell intensified here. Near the medical station's entrance, we found the first clear signs of violence. Medical supplies were scattered across the floor. A stainless steel rolling bed lay overturned. On the wall, a bright red stain traced a jagged downward line, stark against cream wallpaper. Inside the infirmary was worse. Blood soaked into sheets, splashed countertops. Cabinets lay open, their contents spilled out hastily, empty bottles and scattered syringes glittering beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. Rivera picked up a clipboard from the floor, scanning it quickly. They had patients showing severe fever and disorientation 2 days ago, he whispered. They locked several inside isolation rooms. My stomach lurched as we peered through thick observation windows into these isolation rooms. Beds inside were empty, sheets twisted and tangled, restraints snapped or chewed through. The doors had been forced open from the inside, hinges warped as if by impossible strength. Ensign Leonard whispered something quietly into the radio, his face pale, eyes staring vacantly into the darkness beyond the infirmary corridor. Lieutenant Porter made a quick decision. We'd split into 2 groups, Rivera, Leonard, and Donovan, to secure the bridge and try restoring communications. Hargrove and myself would check the engine rooms below decks, determining if power could be restored and the ship controlled again. I didn't envy their path to the bridge, where any answers awaited about what had happened above decks. But descending even deeper into the belly of the Aurora Queen, into the engineering spaces, seemed worse. A place darker, tighter, more claustrophobic. Hargrove led the way with a flashlight, each step echoing hollowly down steel stairs that descended toward the lowest decks. With every level, the temperature rose, the air becoming thicker, almost choking. The quiet groan of the ship's structure grew louder, joined by strange noises from deeper within, metallic creaks, dripping water, distant scratching noises. When we reached the engine room entrance, Hargrove hesitated, shining the flashlight beam slowly across the massive steel door hanging slightly ajar, smeared with more dark handprints. My eyes traced the streaked prints, following them into the shadowy corridor beyond, where the feeble glow of emergency lighting ended abruptly. We paused, listening. Somewhere ahead, deep in the darkness, something moved. A faint dragging noise, slow and deliberate. Hargrove looked at me, face drawn tight with uncertainty. There were no commands or gestures needed. We both knew we had to continue. I pushed the door open wider, stepping into the heavy darkness of the ship's mechanical heart. It swallowed us instantly, every cautious footstep echoing harshly through corridors of silent steel. As we moved deeper, the noises around us began to grow louder, closer, less uncertain. Hargrove moved slightly ahead, his flashlight beam cutting sharply through the darkness, reflecting off tangled bundles of pipes and wires, polished metal surfaces, and clusters of machinery whose purpose I barely understood. Normally, engine rooms thrived with activity. Engineers monitoring screens, the rhythmic pulse of powerful engines. But here the silence was oppressive, punctuated only by occasional metallic drips and creaks echoing from unseen depths. We reached the central control console, its panel flickering weakly. Hargrove set down his equipment and carefully examined the readouts, his face illuminated in harsh reds and greens. He shook his head grimly. Engines offline, emergency generators barely holding. Whatever happened here shut them down deliberately. He pointed his flashlight toward a heavy service door at the far end of the room. The door was slightly ajar, smeared again with those dark, frantic prints. "Fuel and mechanical storage through there," he murmured. "We might find the backup power relays." As we approached the door, our lights revealed more troubling signs. A tool cart was overturned, heavy wrenches scattered across the floor like discarded toys. A smear of dark fluid led away from the scene, sliding underneath the heavy door into whatever lay beyond. I hesitated, staring at it, but Hargrove pushed the door open wider, flooding the storage room with his flashlight's beam. We were greeted by an acrid, pungent odor that cut sharply through the air. The storage room was dim, emergency lamps pulsing weakly. Large storage drums lined the walls, clearly labeled: lubricants, coolant, emergency diesel fuel. Between them lay scattered equipment, tools, helmets, discarded gloves. But it was the figures sprawled motionless across the floor that seized our attention. They wore crew uniforms, grease-stained coveralls torn and shredded, their limbs twisted unnaturally, sprawled in unnatural positions. Hargrove moved closer, cautiously examining the closest body. "Looks like they fought each other," he whispered, pointing out defensive wounds on the crewman's arms and hands. Nearby lay a wrench, smeared and dented. It had clearly been used as a weapon. Before I could respond, a metallic clang echoed sharply through the engine spaces behind us, loud enough to startle both of us upright. We spun around quickly, flashlight beams slicing through the darkness, illuminating only shadows and empty corridors. The sound echoed again, closer this time. Something was moving among the machinery, quietly enough to remain hidden, loudly enough to keep us aware of its presence. I scanned every shadow, every open doorway, waiting, muscles tensed, finger resting on my weapon's safety. Hargrove whispered urgently into his radio, calling Porter, Rivera, Donovan, Leonard, anyone, but received only bursts of static in response. The radio wasn't fully dead, yet it refused to relay any message clearly. We were effectively alone, isolated far below deck. We moved quickly toward the control room, securing the heavy door behind us, sliding its heavy locking mechanism into place. My hands shook slightly as the bolt snapped shut, the sharp metallic sound reverberating with finality. I pressed my ear against the door briefly, hearing the slow, deliberate movement beyond it. It wasn't trying to get in. Not yet, anyway. It was simply pacing, dragging slowly, as if patiently waiting. "Try restarting the generator manually," Hargrove instructed, his voice strained. He pointed to a small separate console embedded in the wall. "It's our best chance to restore ship-wide communication." I nodded, crouching beside the controls, flipping open panels, carefully following printed emergency instructions. Behind me, Hargrove remained vigilant, sweeping the room with his flashlight, eyes shifting nervously between shadows. Each distant noise made us pause, alert for movement. After several tense minutes, the generator sputtered briefly, groaned, then began humming faintly, its rhythmic drone oddly comforting. The lights brightened slightly, still dim, but brighter than before. A nearby console beeped gently to life, green indicator lights flashing cautiously. Hargrove approached swiftly, trying the radio again. This time we heard a fragmented voice breaking through the static. "Porter, Rivera, bridge secure, no one here. Strange readings from decks. Confirm situation below deck. Respond." Relief briefly crossed Hargrove's face. He pressed the transmit button. Bridge team, this is Hargrove. Engines offline. Emergency generator restarted. Crew down here is gone. Something violent occurred. Request immediate evacuation procedures. Static replied again, broken by Donovan's voice, high-pitched and anxious. Copy. Evacuation protocols. Meet on promenade deck. Confirm you have clear route. Before Hargrove could reply, an alarm suddenly blared loudly from the console beside us, its harsh, electronic wail deafening. A warning flashed urgently on the screen. Containment breach. Cold storage compartment 4. I glanced at Hargrove, confused. Cold storage was 2 levels above us, mostly for supplies and food preservation. Why would it trigger a breach alarm now? Hargrove stared at the screen, clearly processing something else. The infirmary records mentioned isolating infected passengers, he said slowly. What if the crew tried to quarantine them? Maybe they sealed them inside somewhere secure, like cold storage. The implication chilled me deeply. You think passengers broke out? He nodded grimly. Or someone opened it deliberately. More metallic clanging resonated outside our sealed room, louder and more aggressive now. I imagined dozens of figures moving methodically, searching, driven by whatever compelled them onward. Whatever had escaped cold storage, or perhaps freed it, was not simply roaming aimlessly. It was methodically exploring the ship, deck by deck. The radio crackled again, Donovan's voice frantic. Hargrove, Thompson, get out of there. Rivera spotted passengers moving on security cameras. Something wrong. They don't look alive. Repeat. Passengers not normal, moving slowly. Multiple decks affected. Avoid all contact. Hargrove keyed the radio urgently, but our transmitter suddenly erupted in static, a harsh squealing noise drowning any further communication. He threw the radio aside in frustration, grabbing equipment quickly. Forget restoring power. We need to leave, now. I grabbed my flashlight and followed him to the opposite door, opening it cautiously into the corridor we originally entered through. The emergency lights glowed weakly along the walls, illuminating a path back to the stairs. At first, nothing moved ahead, nothing emerged from shadows or doorways. But halfway back to the stairs, we heard faint rhythmic shuffling, slow dragging steps moving steadily closer from behind. Glancing back, my flashlight beam caught a figure emerging from the darkness. A crewman, dressed in torn, stained coveralls, his movements rigid, awkward. His face pale, expressionless eyes staring emptily, mouth hanging slightly open. Others soon appeared behind him, their movements similarly slow but steady, filling the corridor methodically, silently advancing toward us. We sprinted toward the stairs, the figures behind us never speeding up, never hesitating, simply following with relentless patience. When we reached the stairs, we ascended rapidly, ignoring caution now, urgency overriding caution. Behind us, the steady footsteps echoed rhythmically through metal stairwells, the slow, patient pursuit not stopping. We burst out onto a higher deck, slamming and sealing another heavy door behind us, buying mere moments. Only then did we stop, gasping silently. The corridors around us silent once again, deceptively calm. But we now understood clearly what had happened aboard the Aurora Queen. This wasn't a technical malfunction or ordinary distress call. Something terrible had spread rapidly, infecting crew and passengers alike, transforming them into something dangerously patient, methodical, relentless. And whatever they had become, they now controlled the lower decks, slowly advancing upward. Hargrove checked the deck layout diagram on the wall, running his finger hastily along the route toward the ship's bridge. We'll use the emergency stairs forward, then cross directly through the central atrium, he whispered sharply, eyes darting back to the sealed door behind us. Fastest route, straight to Porter. I nodded without argument, casting another cautious glance toward the heavy steel door. There was silence now. No banging, no scratching, just the suffocating, unnatural quiet of an abandoned ship. But I knew they were still there, silently waiting, endlessly patient. We moved swiftly but quietly down the deserted hallway. Emergency lighting cast a sickly red glow over the plush carpets, highlighting abandoned luggage, spilled belongings, and smeared stains that we deliberately avoided looking at closely. Every open stateroom doorway we passed became a potential threat. Every shadowed corridor a place for something terrible to wait in ambush. After several tense minutes, we reached the central atrium, a vast, open space spanning several decks, normally bustling with passengers enjoying onboard entertainment, shopping, or relaxing. Now, it stood darkened and empty, tables overturned, decorative plants scattered, broken glass shimmering dully beneath our flashlight beams. We crossed carefully, footsteps echoing quietly across polished marble tiles. Around us rose the empty balconies of higher decks, shrouded in darkness, their shadows almost appearing to shift and watch us. My eyes scanned upward instinctively, unease growing stronger with every step. Halfway across, we both froze simultaneously. From the upper levels, distant movement caught my eye, slow, silent figures appearing along balcony edges, looking down. Passengers, still dressed in vacation attire, standing motionless, heads angled downward, faces expressionless and pale. They simply watched us pass below, motionless sentinels silently tracking our every move. "Keep moving," Hargrove whispered urgently, voice strained. "Don't look up again." We quickened our pace toward the forward stairwell, deliberately avoiding looking back, ignoring the instinctive dread of unseen eyes on us from above. Reaching the emergency stairs, we ascended quickly, 2 steps at a time, flashlights sweeping ahead. Finally, after a torturous climb, we emerged onto the bridge deck. Here the hallways were narrower, utilitarian rather than decorative, and the silence felt deeper, more oppressive. We moved cautiously toward the bridge, flashlight beams illuminating walls lined with framed maritime certifications and crew photos, reminders of a now absent normalcy. As we reached the sealed entrance to the bridge, Hargrove tapped gently 3 times, signaling our arrival. A moment later, bolts slid heavily aside, and Rivera's tense, relieved face appeared in the gap. He ushered us swiftly inside, sealing the door firmly behind us. The bridge was dim, illuminated only by instrument panels and the faint daylight filtering through tinted windows. Lieutenant Porter stood at the helm, face pale but composed, reviewing a ship's schematic on the display. Donovan hunched over the communication panel, headphones on, rapidly cycling through frequencies. Leonard stood quietly at the rear, hands resting uneasily on his holstered pistol. "Report," Porter ordered immediately, turning to face us. Hargrove quickly described our experiences below decks: the engine sabotage, the cold storage breach, the infected crew members. Porter listened quietly, absorbing every detail, his expression growing grimmer. "We've seen them," Porter said after a moment. "Security cameras show groups forming near stairwells, elevators. They seem organized, not mindless." Rivera nodded uneasily, adding, "We saw them on monitors from multiple decks, passengers and crew, grouped up and moving slowly, deliberately, almost patrolling." "They're waiting," Leonard added suddenly, speaking for the first time, voice hollow. "Like they're planning something. Maybe they know we're here." Porter shook his head slowly. "No assumptions. We follow procedure, get word back to Sector Miami, and wait for extraction." Donovan suddenly jerked upright from her console, eyes wide with a mixture of relief and urgency. "I have a weak connection with Sector Miami," she said breathlessly. "They want our exact situation. Orders?" Porter moved swiftly beside her, grabbing the radio handset. "This is Lieutenant James Porter, aboard cruise liner Aurora Queen. Confirm severe onboard outbreak, unknown contagion. Passengers and crew displaying signs of altered state. Request immediate extraction." Static crackled briefly, followed by a distorted reply from Sector Miami's Operations Center. "Copy Aurora Queen. Situation understood. Confirming emergency extraction. Hold position." Porter exhaled slowly, tension easing slightly. "We have our orders. Hold and secure. Reinforcements inbound." A tense silence settled over the bridge, punctuated only by the soft hum of electronics. But relief was short-lived. Moments later, Leonard's voice broke sharply through the quiet. Movement, main stairwell outside the bridge. We gathered quickly at the bridge windows, peering cautiously outward. From below, dark shapes slowly ascended, passengers moving deliberately, heads tilted upward, vacant eyes fixed directly on us. They filled the narrow stairwell, advancing slowly, purposefully. Porter wasted no time. "Barricade the door, quickly!" We swiftly pulled heavy equipment, chairs, filing cabinets, anything substantial, to reinforce the locked bridge entrance. Through the small reinforced glass window, we watched the figures approach, pressing calmly against the steel door, exerting slow, steady pressure. Their movements were oddly synchronized, silent, deliberate. Then, without warning, the ship's PA system crackled to life, a distorted, calm voice broadcasting gently throughout the vessel, chillingly out of place. "This is Captain William Holloway. Passengers, remain calm. We are experiencing a minor situation. Please remain in your staterooms and await further instructions. Crew members, please assist passengers to designated areas. Everything is under control." Porter glanced sharply toward Donovan, eyes wide with disbelief. "How?" She stared back, visibly shaken. "PA system must have been overridden from another location. That can't be Captain Holloway." We listened helplessly as the announcement repeated softly, calmly, echoing through corridors beyond our barricaded door, eerily reassuring, undeniably false. Below, on security monitors, more passengers began leaving cabins, slowly congregating in groups, moving methodically towards the upper decks. Our surveillance showed clearly coordinated movements, far from random. "Someone, or something, is deliberately gathering survivors into groups," Rivera whispered tensely. "It's coordinated." Donovan's headset crackled loudly again. She jerked sharply, listening intently, then whispered urgently. "Sector Miami reporting airborne assets dispatched. 2 helicopters inbound for immediate evacuation. ETA 15 minutes upper deck rendezvous." Porter immediately gave orders. "We move now. Rendezvous at helipad on upper deck. Arm yourselves, move swiftly." We cleared our barricade, pausing only briefly as the heavy door swung open into the darkened hallway. Our flashlights illuminated dozens of pale faces standing silently, waiting patiently in the corridor ahead, passengers staring blankly, blocking our path. They stood motionless, blocking escape, as if perfectly aware of our intended route. Porter raised his weapon cautiously, giving a single command. "Hold your positions, do not approach us." They didn't respond, just stood silently, impassively watching. As we cautiously stepped forward, weapons raised defensively, the figures began slowly parting, opening a narrow path for us. Their empty gazes never broke contact, unblinking eyes following our every careful step. Each movement felt surreal, dreamlike, as if we'd stepped into some twisted ceremony. We moved cautiously, stepping through their ranks. None attempted to touch us or impede our movement, yet their calmness filled me with dread. Their silent cooperation implied planning, intelligence, intentions we couldn't possibly understand. The helicopter landing deck lay ahead, accessed via a wide stairway. As we approached, the gathered passengers simply parted further, stepping back silently. Every careful, deliberate step we took was met with calm observation. Hundreds of eyes, blank yet attentive, tracing our progress. They formed a quiet corridor for us, guiding us directly to the uppermost deck. Lieutenant Porter never lowered his weapon, his posture stiff with suspicion. Rivera walked carefully beside me, whispering cautiously, "This feels like a trap." Leonard was even more uneasy, his breath shallow, visibly disturbed by the strange, methodical movement surrounding us. Donovan kept close to Hargrove, flashlight trembling slightly as she swept its beam cautiously from side to side. We reached the stairs leading up to the helipad deck, the figures slowly gathering behind us in a silent crowd. Their numbers had grown substantially. More passengers, more crew members, each identical in their empty expressions. Above, through heavy clouds, I heard the faint thudding of helicopter blades. The extraction was arriving, timed perfectly, yet feeling terribly distant. The stairs opened onto the vast open-air landing deck atop the ship. The sky was darkening, heavy clouds obscuring the sun, a strange twilight settling over everything. On the deck ahead stood a single figure, facing away toward the horizon. His posture familiar, authoritative, wearing the distinctive uniform of a cruise ship captain. Porter signaled for us to hold position, carefully stepping forward alone. He approached cautiously, stopping several paces away, weapon leveled steadily. "Captain Holloway," he called sharply, voice strained but firm. Slowly, deliberately, the figure turned to face us. Captain William Holloway's face was pale, expressionless. The gold-trimmed captain's uniform neatly buttoned yet oddly stained, his eyes dull and lifeless. He tilted his head slightly, observing us with quiet curiosity. "Welcome aboard the Aurora Queen, Lieutenant Porter," Holloway said softly, voice strangely neutral. "We have been expecting your arrival." Porter's grip tightened visibly on his weapon. "Identify yourself. Are you Captain Holloway? What happened to this ship?" Holloway smiled faintly, a slow, unnatural gesture. "I was Captain Holloway. I still am, in a sense. But now I speak for something greater. We speak for something greater." Porter glanced back quickly at us, clearly uncertain how to handle the bizarre conversation unfolding. Holloway continued calmly, stepping slightly closer. "This ship has entered a new phase. Passengers, crew, we are all part of something extraordinary now. The contagion is not simply an illness, Lieutenant. It is an awakening. We are united in purpose, clarity, and strength." Rivera muttered something urgently beside me, eyes darting nervously toward the helicopters now clearly visible on the horizon, swiftly approaching the ship. Porter shook his head sharply. "Enough. You're infected. Step back. We're leaving." Holloway's smile never wavered. "Infected? No. Improved. Unified. Soon you will understand." As if on cue, behind us the silent crowd from the lower decks began stepping slowly forward, gently but insistently pressing us upward toward the landing pad. We backed away instinctively, forming a tight defensive circle, weapons raised cautiously. Holloway didn't approach further, merely watched quietly, his empty eyes fixed steadily upon us. Above, the thudding blades of 2 Coast Guard helicopters grew louder, drowning out any other sound. Bright spotlights illuminated the landing deck, the pilots clearly hesitant about approaching the crowded scene below. Through a loudspeaker, a pilot's distorted voice echoed urgently. "U.S. Coast Guard rescue team, clear the landing area immediately. Evacuation in progress." The passengers didn't move, didn't acknowledge the helicopters, just stood silently, patiently encircling us. Porter raised his arm, signaling urgently toward the helicopter, motioning for them to descend anyway. After a tense hesitation, the first helicopter lowered cautiously, hovering just above the deck. Porter shouted sharply over the noise, "Prepare to board, quickly!" Leonard moved first, running forward toward the helicopter's open side door. Just as he reached the door, Holloway calmly raised a hand, signaling subtly. Suddenly, the crowd surged forward, not violently, but swiftly, closing ranks, blocking the helicopter access. Leonard turned sharply, weapon raised, but hesitated, unable to fire on unarmed civilians, even if they were no longer entirely human. The crowd seized Leonard gently, without violence, grasping his limbs, pulling him slowly back, absorbing him silently into their ranks. Leonard called out urgently, struggling, but his voice faded quickly, muffled by dozens of bodies surrounding him, quietly, calmly. Porter shouted sharply, weapon aimed directly at Holloway. "Release him, now!" Holloway watched impassively, his voice gentle, almost soothing. "He will join us. You all will, eventually." Porter didn't fire, unwilling or unable to escalate further. Around us the crowd stood motionless again, calmly waiting. Rivera glanced toward me urgently, whispering sharply, "We need another way out. Fast." Hargrove pointed urgently toward the rear service stairwell, barely visible at the far side of the landing deck. "There's another landing pad near the ship's stern. Maybe we can redirect the helicopters there. Donovan grabbed her radio, calling desperately to the second helicopter pilot. Rescue Team Bravo, redirect to aft helipad. Repeat, redirect to aft helipad immediately. The second helicopter hesitated briefly, then acknowledged, lifting higher and swinging quickly toward the stern of the ship. Porter shouted sharply to us, "Move now, quickly!" We sprinted toward the rear staircase, the crowd behind us stepping calmly aside, allowing us passage, their silence more chilling than screams or threats. Porter lingered only briefly, glancing back once toward Holloway, who simply stood quietly, arms calmly folded, patiently watching us leave. The second helipad was smaller, isolated, situated directly above a service area at the ship's stern. When we reached it, breathing rapidly from the hurried retreat, we saw the helicopter already hovering, waiting anxiously. This pad was empty, no waiting crowd, no silent sentinels. One by one we scrambled aboard quickly, helping Donovan and Rivera climb inside. Hargrove went next, urgently reaching back to help Porter. As Porter grasped Hargrove's hand, a sharp tug halted him suddenly. Below, a passenger had silently grasped his ankle, calmly holding tight. Porter struggled briefly, weapon raised, but again hesitated, unwilling to fire on what still appeared to be an ordinary civilian. Hargrove pulled harder, desperately shouting for Porter to hold on. Below, more hands reached upward silently, gently yet firmly gripping Porter's limbs, pulling him steadily downward. He looked directly into Hargrove's eyes, speaking calmly yet urgently. "Go, Hargrove. That's an order." Before we could protest, Porter was silently pulled downward, disappearing slowly into the growing mass below. No screaming, no violence, just quiet resignation. With no other choice, the helicopter lifted swiftly upward, banking sharply away from the ship. Below, the vast Aurora Queen drifted quietly, brightly lit, silent figures standing motionlessly upon the decks, calmly watching us depart. We stared downward in numb disbelief, hearts heavy with unspoken loss. Something terrible had occurred aboard that ship, something far beyond mere infection or illness. Passengers and crew alike had become part of something patient, intelligent, methodical, something with intentions we still couldn't fully comprehend. As the helicopter sped swiftly toward the distant Miami coastline, I felt no relief, no safety, only the growing certainty that this incident aboard the Aurora Queen wasn't isolated. It was just the beginning of something larger, more terrible, something that could spread quietly, calmly, relentlessly. None of us spoke as the helicopter neared the coastline. Donovan stared blankly at her shaking hands. Rivera leaned heavily against the helicopter's bulkhead, eyes lost in distant thought, and Hargrove, who had watched Porter vanish beneath the crowd, sat rigidly beside me. The mood inside the helicopter wasn't triumphant or relieved. It was haunted, each of us silently processing the sheer magnitude of what we'd just witnessed. Below, Sector Miami's coastline came sharply into view, familiar landmarks illuminated by fading sunlight, beaches glowing softly, streets filled with cars and pedestrians oblivious to the nightmare we'd just escaped. I looked down at the bright city, suddenly fragile, impossibly vulnerable. We had escaped, but there was no victory. Something had changed irrevocably on that drifting ship, and now it was coming to shore. The helicopter touched down gently on the Coast Guard Air Station Miami tarmac. The rotors slowed, their heavy drone fading into silence, leaving us in a sudden, surreal quiet. Emergency teams were already waiting. Men and women in biohazard gear rushed toward us, their urgency tempered by cautious fear. We were quickly ushered into a quarantine area, stark white tents erected hastily near the hangar. Medical personnel in protective suits drew blood, tested vitals, asked questions rapidly. Every detail of our encounter was recorded. The slow, coordinated movements, the captain's strange speech, the gentle yet unstoppable manner in which the infected had acted. For hours we sat in tense isolation, answering endless questions posed by increasingly concerned authorities. Scientists from the CDC arrived rapidly, their faces hidden behind masks and goggles, voices calm but tense. Questions focused repeatedly on the strange intelligence displayed by those aboard the Aurora Queen. What was their intention? Had they attempted to communicate further? Were they hostile? We tried our best to explain, but words felt inadequate. Hostile wasn't the right word. They hadn't attacked us directly, yet their calm control of the situation was far more disturbing. They had allowed us to escape, deliberately sending us back, perhaps as messengers, perhaps for reasons we couldn't yet fathom. Late into the night, after endless hours of isolation, we were finally cleared medically. No signs of infection, nothing physically wrong. Yet the emotional toll was obvious. Each of us was permanently changed, marked by what we'd seen. The nightmare aboard the Aurora Queen wouldn't easily fade. A few hours later, in a secured briefing room at Coast Guard Sector Miami, high-ranking officers and scientists reviewed the gathered evidence. Video footage from our helmet-mounted cameras replayed on screens, clearly capturing every haunting moment. No one watching could deny the surreal horror unfolding slowly, methodically aboard that drifting luxury liner. CDC experts quickly established a theory. An unknown pathogen, something viral, possibly neurological in nature, had rapidly infected the ship. The contagion altered behavior significantly, creating a hive-like organized response. Intelligent, coordinated, highly communicative, yet strangely peaceful in its tactics. The calmness wasn't merely a symptom, it was a strategy. But what disturbed us most was news arriving early the next morning from reconnaissance aircraft sent to monitor the Aurora Queen. The ship was empty. No passengers, no crew, no bodies, nothing. Surveillance footage from aircraft confirmed lifeboats were missing, equipment neatly stowed, everything meticulously cleared away, as if passengers had calmly, methodically abandoned ship together. Yet no distress signals were ever received. No lifeboats had been detected drifting at sea. Thousands had simply vanished, as if erased by calm, deliberate purpose. The following days saw Miami placed under quiet alert. Coast Guard patrols intensified offshore monitoring. Cruise terminals halted operations temporarily. Vessels returned urgently to port. Yet publicly, life went on. There was no official announcement, no panic, just quiet, tense vigilance beneath the surface. Days stretched into weeks without further incidents. Quietly, confidence returned. Maybe the event aboard the Aurora Queen had been isolated after all. Perhaps whatever infection had overtaken the passengers was now safely lost at sea, contained. Yet, privately, I never shared that optimism. I spent restless nights poring over my memories of that calm, coordinated crowd aboard the ship, replaying Captain Holloway's strange speech about unity, clarity, something greater awakening. The clarity in their eyes, the patience in their actions, haunted my every quiet moment. They hadn't been acting randomly. They had chosen, very deliberately, not to harm us. Why? Answers came quietly, early one morning, nearly a month after the incident. Rivera called me urgently, voice strained. Turn on the news, now. Local channels reported calmly but urgently. Multiple cruise ships across the Caribbean, Mediterranean and Pacific had abruptly ceased communication. Dozens of ships, suddenly silent, drifting at sea. Governments issued careful statements assuring the public that investigations were underway, downplaying any sense of panic. But I knew what it meant. The Aurora Queen hadn't been an isolated event. It had been the beginning, the quiet start of something inevitable, inexorable. The contagion wasn't limited to a single ship, a single route. It was quietly moving, spreading calmly, intelligently, using humanity's very methods of transportation against itself. That night, sitting alone in my darkened apartment, I realized the grim reality. Whatever the passengers and crew aboard the Aurora Queen had become, they were still out there, quietly, patiently spreading, slowly changing the fabric of society. They didn't need violence or chaos. Calm cooperation was far more effective. How do you fight something that never openly attacks? Something that simply and quietly absorbs, transforms, unites? I took leave from active duty shortly afterward. unable to continue as before. Some threats you can't face directly, some haunt you quietly, methodically. But even at home, the events never faded from memory. Everywhere I looked, busy streets, crowded airports, bustling markets, I saw vulnerability, humanity unaware of its slow, inevitable fate. I share this story now because others need to understand what I saw aboard the Aurora Queen. We narrowly escaped, but not because we were stronger or cleverer. They let us leave deliberately, knowing we would bring their story ashore. Maybe it was a message, maybe a warning, or perhaps an invitation. Because now I see clearly what I couldn't before. Their silent calm wasn't weakness. It was strength, certainty, patience. They could wait indefinitely, expanding slowly, quietly, inevitably. This isn't the apocalypse we expected, violent and chaotic. This is quiet assimilation, calm transformation. It's already begun, and I suspect by the time the world fully recognizes it, it will be far too late. If you're hearing this now, understand clearly, the passengers aboard the Aurora Queen were just the first. Soon enough, they will no longer be the minority. The quiet contagion, patient and intelligent, continues spreading unseen, unnoticed. Be watchful, be cautious, but above all, understand clearly that silence doesn't mean safety. Calmness doesn't mean peace. And if you ever encounter passengers who seem too quiet, too patient, too calm, don't assume you've escaped just because they allow you to leave. You may only be carrying their silent message further. That's all for now. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more unsettling creepypastas. Your support keeps my channel alive. Until next time, stay quiet, stay vigilant, and trust nothing, not even the silence.